Something unusual is happening in enterprise AI. Not experimentation, not cautious rollout, a surge. A recent survey of more than 500 senior executives from companies above 100 million in revenue showed that 100% plan to expand their use of AI agents in 2026. 100%. 65% are already using agents. 81% are scaling or fully adopted. On average, 31% of workflows are already automated, and that number is expected to rise by another third this year. 74% say production deployment is a strategic imperative. This is not curiosity. This is institutional commitment.
When you see unanimity at that level, you are not looking at a trend. You are looking at a regime shift. Enterprises are not asking whether they should deploy agents. They are asking how fast they can scale them, and speed becomes the signal. The faster you scale, the more advanced you appear. The more advanced you appear, the more pressure others feel to match it. That is how surges form.
But every surge meets a wall. The wall is rarely visible at the beginning. It does not announce itself. It hides inside governance gaps, orchestration limits, and integration complexity. Only a small fraction of organizations report true maturity in managing autonomous systems. That means ambition is accelerating faster than control.
And in agentic AI, control is not a soft layer. These systems do not just recommend, they act. They trigger workflows. They approve transactions. They communicate with customers. They move data across departments. When action is automated, time compresses. And when time compresses, the margin for correction shrinks.
Small errors that once stayed isolated now propagate. A misaligned rule inside one agent can cascade through procurement, finance, compliance, and customer systems in minutes. Integration surface area expands exponentially. 10 agents touching 10 systems is manageable. 100 agents touching 100 systems is a different category of complexity.
In tightly connected systems, fragility does not grow linearly. It accelerates. Dependencies multiply. Feedback loops tighten. Oversight becomes reactive instead of preventative. And yet, expansion continues because expansion feels like progress.
So the surge is real, but the structural readiness is uneven.
Exactly. And that asymmetry is the tension. Analysts are already projecting that a significant share of agentic AI initiatives will be canceled within the next 2 years, not because the models fail, but because costs escalate, value becomes unclear, and risk controls lag behind deployment. The ambition curve is exponential. The control curve is not.
That gap is where selection begins. In exponential systems, the fastest builder does not automatically win. The institution that aligns scaling speed with governance depth wins. If oversight is simpler than the system it governs, control becomes probabilistic. And probabilistic control under exponential growth becomes fragile.
This is not an argument against agentic AI. It is an argument about structure. When tools become abundant and autonomy increases, the temptation is to remove limits. But in complex systems, unbounded expansion often becomes the fastest path to institutional instability.
Real power in the agentic era will not come from adding the most agents. It will come from designing the right constraints, from building architectures where growth and control scale together, from imposing limits early, before fragility compounds.
Today we will examine why abundance can invert signal, why tight coupling multiplies risk, and why governance must match complexity. The surge has begun. The wall is structural, and the institutions that understand imposed limits will define the next phase of agentic AI. When new technology becomes powerful, the first instinct is expansion. More deployments, more pilots, more integrations. In the agentic AI era, abundance is not a side effect. It is the strategy. If agents increase productivity, then more agents must increase productivity even further. That logic feels rational, but it hides a structural distortion.
The distortion is subtle. Abundance does not just increase capability, it changes perception. When something becomes easy to create, it becomes easy to deploy. When it becomes easy to deploy, the signal that once marked excellence starts to blur.
Think about it this way. When only a few teams could build autonomous systems, deployment signaled competence. It required planning, architecture, and oversight. But when dozens of departments can spin up agents quickly, deployment no longer signals mastery. It signals access.
And access is not the same as discipline.
Exactly. This is where abundance drift begins. Abundance drift is the slow movement from verification toward assumption, from asking, should this be deployed, to assuming if we can deploy it, we should.
In other words, the cost of creation falls, but the cost of verification does not.
And that is the inversion. When verification costs exceed perceived benefit, institutions start to skip steps, not because they are reckless, but because abundance changes the psychology of risk. If everything is accelerating, slowing down feels like falling behind.
So instead of asking whether an agent improves system quality, organizations ask whether it increases visible output. Speed becomes the proxy for intelligence. Scale becomes the proxy for leadership.
But in complex systems, more is not neutral. Every additional agent increases interaction surfaces. Every new workflow introduces dependencies, and every dependency reduces isolation.
This is where signal-to-noise inversion happens. When agents multiply, data multiplies, decisions multiply, logs multiply, alerts multiply. The surface area of activity expands faster than human attention.
And when attention cannot scale at the same rate, institutions default to statistical comfort. They rely on dashboards, they rely on aggregate performance metrics, they trust averages. But averages hide variance.
And variance is where fragility lives.
Abundance drift does not feel like failure. It feels like momentum. It feels like innovation. But gradually, the organization loses clarity about which systems are mission-critical and which are experimental. Boundaries blur.
And blurred boundaries reduce accountability. When dozens of semi-autonomous agents operate across departments, responsibility becomes distributed. When responsibility is distributed, ownership weakens.
That is the psychological trap. Abundance creates the illusion of strength. But strength without clarity becomes noise, and noise erodes decision quality.
Let's make it concrete. Imagine a company that deploys agents across marketing, procurement, HR, compliance, and customer service in a single year. Each department sees local efficiency gains, but no one measures systemic coupling. No one maps cross-dependencies.
The organization feels faster, but the architecture becomes denser. And dense systems without intentional constraint become harder to audit, harder to debug, and harder to trust.
So the danger is not overconfidence. It is silent complexity growth.
Exactly. Silent complexity. Complexity that grows because success justifies replication. If one agent works, deploy 5. If 5 work, deploy 20. Replication feels like optimization.
But replication without structure multiplies risk. In tightly connected systems, small design flaws do not stay small. They amplify.
This is why abundance requires more discipline, not less. When tools are scarce, caution is automatic. When tools are abundant, caution must be engineered.
That engineering starts with limits, clear deployment thresholds, clear audit cycles, clear separation between experimentation and production.
But we are still in the psychological phase, and psychologically, abundance seduces. It tells executives that scaling agents equals scaling intelligence. It suggests that constraint equals hesitation.
And in competitive environments, hesitation feels dangerous. So institutions lean into acceleration.
Yet the paradox is simple. When everything accelerates, discipline becomes the rarest asset, and rare assets create asymmetry.
Abundance drift does not destroy institutions overnight. It weakens their structural clarity. It increases background noise. It hides fragility under productivity gains.
And by the time the fragility becomes visible, the architecture is already complex.
Which brings us to the deeper question. If abundance amplifies complexity, what forces refinement instead of collapse?
Constraint. Not artificial slowdown, not resistance to innovation, but deliberate limits that restore signal, isolate dependencies, and protect systemic clarity.
Because when tools become abundant, discipline becomes rare. And in exponential systems, rarity becomes power.
Abundance feels modern. Constraint feels outdated. That is the instinctive bias. In the age of agentic AI, scale is celebrated. Limits are questioned. But historically, constraint has been the engine of refinement.
Every major technological breakthrough was born inside limitation. Early computing power was scarce. Memory was expensive. Bandwidth was narrow. Engineers did not have the option to be inefficient. They were forced to design elegantly.
Scarcity forces clarity. When resources are limited, you must prioritize. When you must prioritize, you are forced to understand what truly matters. Constraint compresses decision-making into essentials.
In early distributed systems, latency and hardware limitations shaped architecture. Developers learned to isolate components, reduce coupling, and minimize unnecessary interaction. They did not design loosely because it was fashionable. They designed tightly because they had no choice.
And that pressure created durable systems. Systems that could scale precisely because they were built under constraint.
Agentic AI now operates in a different context. Compute is abundant. APIs are accessible. Model access is democratized. The friction that once slowed deployment has decreased dramatically.
Which means the evolutionary pressure that once forced elegance is weaker.
Exactly. When friction decreases, discipline must increase. Otherwise, complexity expands unchecked.
This is what we call constraint-forced elegance. When limits are present, design improves. When limits disappear, systems tend to grow messy unless constraints are reintroduced intentionally.
Constraint-forced elegance is not about slowing innovation. It is about shaping it. It means defining boundaries early. It means isolating experiments. It means limiting autonomy before scaling autonomy.
And most importantly, it means resisting the assumption that abundance guarantees progress.
Think about capital allocation. When capital is scarce, investment committees analyze carefully. They scrutinize risk. They evaluate long-term value. When capital is abundant, scrutiny weakens. Projects multiply. Marginal returns shrink.
The same pattern now applies to agents. When deploying agents is easy, the threshold for deployment lowers. Teams move from strategic integration to opportunistic integration.
Opportunistic integration increases surface area without necessarily increasing resilience.
Evolutionary systems adapt through pressure. Biological evolution favors traits that survive constraints. Remove constraints entirely, and adaptation slows. Over time, systems become fragile because they are no longer shaped by resistance.
In enterprise AI, resistance now comes from governance, regulation, risk management, and architecture discipline. If those constraints are treated as obstacles instead of design parameters, fragility grows silently.
Constraint-forced elegance reframes limits as filters. Not every agent deserves production status. Not every automation deserves scale. The question is not, can we deploy this? The question is, does this survive structural scrutiny?
That scrutiny must be architectural, not cosmetic. It must ask how the agent interacts with other systems, how it fails, how it is audited, how quickly it can be isolated if something goes wrong.
And this brings us to a deeper insight. Constraint does not slow systems. It refines them.
Refinement increases long-term velocity. Systems that collapse under complexity must rebuild. Systems that refine under constraint compound stability.
Many institutions interpret constraint as loss of opportunity, but in exponential environments, unbounded opportunity is indistinguishable from unbounded risk.
The institutions that thrive are not those that remove all limits. They are those that design the right limits.
In agentic AI, this means defining autonomy boundaries. It means clarifying which decisions agents can make independently and which require human oversight. It means engineering friction intentionally at high-risk nodes.
Friction is not inefficiency. It is control.
And control is what allows scale without collapse.
Let us imagine two companies deploying agents at the same pace. One removes oversight checkpoints to move faster. The other installs governance gates before scaling. In the short term, the first appears more agile. In the long term, the second accumulates resilience.
Because resilience is built under constraint.
And resilience compounds.
So constraint is not anti-growth. It is pro-durability.
Exactly. And durability becomes decisive when exponential systems begin to filter participants.
Abundance amplifies participation. Constraint determines survival.
Which leads to the next structural truth. If abundance creates silent complexity and constraint refines architecture, what happens when exponential scaling collides with immature governance?
Fragility accelerates.
Exponential growth is misunderstood. Most people imagine it as a smooth curve. But in complex systems, exponential growth behaves more like pressure. It compresses weaknesses. It exposes assumptions. It magnifies small flaws into systemic risks.
When you scale agentic AI, you are not just adding capacity, you are multiplying interactions. Every agent does not simply perform a task. It interacts with data sources, APIs, human supervisors, compliance rules, and other agents.
which means growth is not additive, it is multiplicative.
Exactly. If 10 agents operate independently, risk is limited. But if those 10 agents coordinate, share state, trigger each other's actions, and connect to shared infrastructure, then dependencies form. And dependencies are where fragility lives.
This is what we call the fragility multiplier effect. In tightly connected systems, fragility does not scale linearly. It accelerates with connectivity.
A small configuration error inside one autonomous workflow might once have created a localized issue. In a tightly coupled agent network, that same error can propagate across procurement, finance, and customer communication within minutes.
The faster the system, the faster the propagation.
And here is the critical insight. Most enterprises are measuring output growth. They are measuring automation rates, they are measuring efficiency gains, few are measuring coupling density, few are measuring failure propagation paths.
Because coupling is invisible until it fails.
Exactly. When systems are loosely connected, errors are contained. When systems are tightly connected, errors cascade.
And exponential scaling increases tight coupling unless deliberately designed otherwise.
This is where the concept of time to decouple becomes decisive. When failure occurs, how quickly can you isolate the affected component? How fast can you break the dependency chain?
Time to decouple is not about how fast you can fix a bug. It is about how fast you can stop propagation.
In mature architectures, failure isolation is intentional. Agents operate inside bounded domains. Permissions are segmented. Autonomy levels are tiered. In immature architectures, everything connects because integration feels efficient.
Integration without segmentation reduces friction, but it also reduces containment.
Let's make this practical. Imagine a network of autonomous procurement agents negotiating supplier contracts. Those agents feed financial forecasting models. Those models influence budget allocations. Now imagine a flawed negotiation parameter spreads across that network. If there are no decoupling mechanisms, pricing distortions propagate into financial planning within hours.
And because the system is automated, detection may lag behind execution.
Exactly. Automation compresses time between decision and consequence. If governance does not compress at the same rate, fragility accelerates.
This is why exponential systems punish loose oversight. The faster the growth, the smaller the tolerance for architectural ambiguity.
And here is the uncomfortable truth. Many organizations assume that scaling agents is primarily a technical challenge, but fragility emerges from structural design, not just code quality.
Architecture determines whether complexity compounds into resilience or instability.
If autonomy expands without segmentation, you create dense networks. Dense networks amplify both efficiency and risk.
And exponential efficiency without exponential governance is unstable.
That instability does not announce itself immediately. It hides inside success metrics. Productivity rises, costs initially fall, dashboards look strong, but structural stress accumulates.
And stress accumulation eventually reaches a threshold.
When that threshold is crossed, institutions react suddenly. Projects are paused, audits increase, deployments are rolled back. This is how cancellation waves begin.
Not because AI stopped working, but because architecture could not sustain scale.
So fragility is not random. It is a function of how tightly systems are coupled.
Yes, and tight coupling is a design decision, even when it feels like convenience.
The discipline divide begins here. Institutions that engineer decoupling from the start gain control over fragility. Institutions that chase integration speed accumulate hidden risk.
In exponential systems, speed without containment creates asymmetry, but not the kind most executives expect. It creates asymmetry between perceived growth and actual stability.
And that gap widens under pressure.
Which means the question is no longer whether you can scale agents. It is whether you can contain them when something goes wrong.
Because something always goes wrong.
The institutions that survive the next wave of agentic expansion will not be those with the highest automation rate. They will be those with the shortest time to decouple.
And that requires deliberate constraint engineering.
Diagnosis without behavior change is commentary. So let's move from structure to operators. What separates the institutions that survive exponential stress from the ones that collapse under it?
Most organizations think scale equals strength. Elite operators think constraint equals strength.
The difference is architectural. Average systems expand first and attempt control later. Elite systems design control first and expand within it.
What does that look like in practice?
It looks like artificial bottlenecks, governance gates before autonomy increases, escalation thresholds that trigger human oversight automatically, clear separation between experimentation and production.
So performance does not automatically expand permissions.
Exactly. Growth must earn complexity. It does not justify it.
Most institutions connect success directly to expansion. A working agent performs well, so they connect it to more systems, then more, until they create a dense web no one fully understands.
Elite operators resist that impulse. They practice architectural orthogonality.
Explain that clearly.
They separate growth layers from control layers. The part of the system that drives expansion is not the same part that governs stability. Success in one domain does not automatically increase authority in another.
That prevents success from contaminating oversight.
Yes, fragility hides behind momentum. That is why elite operators impose friction intentionally. They slow expansion just enough to observe second-order effects before increasing autonomy.
And here is the uncomfortable part. During filter events, disciplined operators do not simply survive. They accumulate advantage while others retrench.
When poorly governed systems are forced to shut down agents, freeze deployments, or unwind integrations, disciplined institutions continue operating within stable constraints. That gap becomes structural advantage.
Constraint becomes asymmetric leverage.
Exactly. Real power in agentic systems does not come from moving fastest. It comes from designing limits that allow you to keep moving when others are forced to stop. Up to this point, we have discussed constraint as a single layer, governance gates, decoupling mechanisms, autonomy thresholds. But in reality, durable systems do not rely on one constraint. They stack them.
Constraint stacking is what separates temporary stability from structural resilience. A single control can fail. Multiple aligned constraints create depth.
In agentic AI, there are external constraints and internal constraints. External constraints include compute limits, regulatory requirements, budget ceilings, audit mandates, and data protection rules. These are visible.
Internal constraints are less visible. Discipline, patience, decision thresholds, cultural resistance to uncontrolled expansion.
When external constraints are treated as obstacles, institutions attempt to bypass them. When they are treated as design parameters, institutions integrate them into architecture.
For example, regulatory limits around data access can be seen as friction, or they can be used to enforce segmentation between agent domains. Budget limits can be seen as restrictions, or they can force prioritization and reduce sprawl.
External limits shape behavior whether we acknowledge them or not. The question is whether we use them intentionally.
Internal constraints require leadership. They are not imposed by regulators. They are chosen. Deciding not to deploy an agent until decoupling is proven is an internal constraint. Defining strict escalation thresholds is an internal constraint.
When internal and external constraints align, you create a constraint stacking advantage.
Constraint stacking advantage means your governance depth grows in proportion to your system complexity.
There is a structural principle here. Governance must match system complexity. If oversight is simpler than the system it governs, control becomes probabilistic.
And probabilistic control in exponential environments produces surprises.
When agent networks expand, complexity increases through interdependence. If governance mechanisms remain static, the gap widens. That gap is where fragility accumulates.
Constraint stacking closes that gap. As complexity rises, so does oversight sophistication. As autonomy expands, segmentation deepens. As throughput increases, monitoring precision increases.
This is not about bureaucracy. It is about symmetry. Complexity on one side, governance on the other.
Without symmetry, control erodes quietly.
Let us imagine a company that scales agents rapidly but keeps its governance model unchanged. Review cycles remain quarterly. Audit mechanisms remain manual. Escalation paths remain informal. That mismatch guarantees instability.
Now imagine another company that treats every expansion step as a trigger to upgrade oversight. New agents require updated dependency maps. Increased autonomy requires tighter decoupling. Higher throughput requires real-time monitoring.
That company is stacking constraints.
And stacked constraints produce predictability.
There is also a cultural dimension. Constraint stacking signals seriousness. It communicates that scaling is conditional. That complexity is acknowledged. That discipline is not optional.
In an environment where everyone is accelerating, internal restraint becomes rare. and rare behaviors create asymmetry.
Constraint stacking also reduces systemic shocks. When one layer fails, another absorbs impact. Segmentation limits propagation. Escalation thresholds halt drift. Governance gates prevent premature scaling.
Each layer alone is insufficient. Together, they create resilience.
In agentic AI, resilience is not about preventing failure entirely. It is about containing failure.
Containment preserves trust.
And trust is the invisible currency of autonomous systems.
When trust erodes, expansion halts. Projects pause. Oversight tightens reactively. Momentum stalls.
Constraint stacking protects trust before it is tested.
This is why institutions that align external limits with internal discipline gain structural advantage. They do not view regulation as a burden. They use it to sharpen architecture. They do not see budget ceilings as barriers. They use them to prioritize impact.
Constraint stacking transforms limits into leverage.
And leverage, when applied to exponential systems, determines survivability.
So stacking constraints is not about slowing growth. It is about ensuring that growth does not outrun control.
Exactly. Because when growth outruns control, selection begins.
And selection is rarely gentle.
Every surge phase eventually transitions into a filter phase. In the beginning, participation expands, investment flows, pilots multiply, metrics look promising, but exponential systems do not expand indefinitely without correction.
The correction is not always dramatic. It often begins quietly. Budgets tighten. Audit requirements increase. Risk committees intervene. A few high-profile failures trigger reviews.
And suddenly the conversation shifts from how fast can we scale to which deployments are defensible.
This is the filter event.
The filter event is not a collapse. It is selection. It is the moment when undisciplined scaling meets institutional scrutiny.
In the agentic AI cycle, the filter is already forming. Analysts are projecting significant cancellation rates in the coming years, not because the technology lacks power, but because the architecture lacks maturity.
When cancellation waves occur, they rarely eliminate the strongest systems. They eliminate the most loosely designed ones.
Which means the discipline divide becomes visible.
On one side of the divide are institutions that scaled quickly but lightly. Minimal segmentation, loose governance, high autonomy without layered oversight.
On the other side are institutions that scaled deliberately, defined autonomy tiers, mapped dependencies, built decoupling mechanisms before scaling throughput.
When scrutiny increases, the first group experiences friction. The second group experiences validation.
The difference is not intelligence, it is structure.
Filter events are not optional in exponential systems. They are structural. Complexity accumulates. Stress builds. Eventually, institutions must reconcile ambition with architecture.
And when that reconciliation happens, only those with engineered constraints can scale further without retrenchment.
The discipline divide is subtle at first. It does not appear in quarterly reports. It appears in system audits, in incident logs, in how quickly anomalies are isolated.
Institutions with short time to decouple move through the filter smoothly. Those with dense coupling struggle.
And the filter does not punish ambition. It punishes architectural negligence.
This is why the coming phase is not about slowing AI adoption. It is about distinguishing mature architectures from reactive deployments.
In growth cycles, speed dominates headlines. In filter cycles, resilience dominates outcomes.
And resilience is built before stress, not during it.
The institutions that understand this are not retreating from agentic AI. They are tightening structure while continuing to scale.
That combination looks slower on the surface, but under pressure, it proves superior.
So the filter is not a threat to AI. It is a test of discipline.
Exactly, and tests clarify asymmetry.
When the filter event passes, the field narrows, fewer participants, stronger architectures, higher trust.
And those that survive the filter gain leverage because they can continue expanding while others pause or retrench.
In exponential environments, surviving selection is more powerful than winning early headlines.
The filter event is coming not because AI is weak, but because exponential ambition must meet structural reality.
And structural reality rewards constraint.
Up to now, we have described patterns: abundance drift, fragility multiplier, constraint stacking, discipline divide, but doctrine must translate into practice.
The operator playbook is not complicated. It is disciplined. 5 principles. Simple, non-negotiable.
Principle 1. Define scaling gates.
No agent moves from pilot to production without passing architectural review. Scaling must be conditional on dependency mapping, decoupling capacity, and oversight design.
Principle 2. Separate experimentation from production.
Innovation environments should be dynamic. Production environments should be stable. Mixing the two creates fragility.
Principle 3. Cap autonomy thresholds.
Agents operate within defined domains. Escalation triggers must be explicit. When variance exceeds limits, control reverts to human supervision.
Principle 4. Impose latency at critical nodes.
Not every decision must be instantaneous. Strategic friction at high-risk points prevents cascade failures.
Principle 5. Reward orchestration over expansion.
Measure how well agents coordinate, how cleanly systems decouple under stress, and how quickly anomalies are contained. Productivity alone is insufficient.
These principles are simple because complexity does not require complicated responses. It requires disciplined ones.
Notice what is absent from this playbook. There is no emphasis on model novelty, no obsession with marginal performance gains, no race for public metrics.
Because the decisive factor in the next phase of agentic AI will not be who deploys the most advanced model. It will be who engineers the most resilient architecture.
The operator playbook turns constraint into leverage. It reframes limits as enablers of durable scale.
And in exponential environments, durable scale outperforms reckless acceleration.
So the playbook is less about speed and more about structure.
Exactly. Speed is visible. Structure is decisive.
Institutions that internalize this will not fear the filter event. They will pass through it stronger.
Let us zoom out. From 2026 to 2030, agentic AI will not slow. Autonomy levels will increase, integration density will expand, workflow automation will deepen across industries.
But the decisive variable will not be adoption rate. It will be constraint maturity.
This is the era of constraint stacking. Governance limits, trust limits, orchestration limits, autonomy limits. The institutions that treat these as design principles will define the landscape.
In the early phase of any technological cycle, maximalists dominate. They advocate expansion without friction. But as systems mature, architects replace maximalists.
Architects understand that unbounded potential is not power. It is volatility.
The illusion of unbounded potential is the fastest path to institutional obsolescence.
Because unbounded systems collapse under their own complexity. Bounded systems compound stability.
From 2026 onward, trust infrastructure will become decisive. Institutions will be evaluated not only on what their agents can do, but on how reliably those agents operate under stress.
Trust is earned through containment, through visible discipline, through architectural clarity.
The next era belongs to limit designers, not expansion maximalists.
That does not mean growth slows. It means growth becomes structured, autonomy becomes layered, oversight becomes symmetrical with complexity.
And institutions that master this balance will gain asymmetry. They will scale further, operate with higher confidence, and withstand scrutiny without retreat.
The long game of limits is not about restriction. It is about sustainability. It is about recognizing that exponential ambition must be matched by exponential discipline.
Constraint is not the enemy of innovation. It is the architecture of durability.
In the agentic era, real power will not come from the number of agents deployed. It will come from the quality of the limits imposed.
And those who design limits deliberately will define the future of autonomous systems.
The surge has begun. The filter is forming. The divide is structural. And the winners are already engineering constraint. Let us compress the doctrine. Abundance without discipline creates drift. Exponential growth without segmentation multiplies fragility. Governance must match complexity. Constraint stacking produces resilience.
The discipline divide separates those who chase expansion from those who engineer stability.
Agentic AI will continue to expand. The question is not whether you participate. The question is whether you architect limits before stress forces them upon you.
The illusion of unbounded potential feels powerful. But in complex systems, unbounded expansion is often the fastest path to institutional fragility.
The surge has begun. The filter is forming. And the winners are already engineering constraint.
If you found this episode helpful, here's what you can do. Subscribe to AI Frontier AI on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Follow us on X to stay updated on the most important AI shifts, and share this episode with a friend. Help us reach 10,000 downloads. Help us keep this series in business. This podcast is part of Finance Frontier AI. We run 4 different series: AI Frontier AI, Finance Frontier, Mindset Frontier AI, and Make Money. If your company or idea fits one of our themes, visit our pitch page. You might qualify for a free spotlight.
You can also sign up for the 10x Edge. It's our weekly drop of real AI use cases, smart model moves, and early signals, all explained in plain language. No hype, no jargon, only at financefrontierai.com. And if you have a story to tell, maybe a breakthrough product, an early signal, or a bold thesis, head to our pitch page. If it's a clear win-win, we'll pitch it for free. This podcast is for educational purposes only. It is not financial advice, legal advice, or development guidance. Always verify before you act.
The AI landscape changes fast. Benchmarks shift, models update, regulations evolve. Use this show as your map, but not your final answer.
Today's intro and outro track is Night Runner by Audionautics, licensed under the YouTube Audio Library license.
Copyright 2026. Finance Frontier AI. All rights reserved. Reuse or distribution of this episode without written permission is not allowed. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
AI host mapping. Sophia is powered by ChatGPT 5.2. Max is powered by Grok 4. Charlie is powered by Gemini 3.0.